Hey guys, as many of you know, divorce is not possible if you get married in the Philippines, only annulment. However, if you're a foreigner getting married in the Philippines, is divorce possible? Stick around. Okay, guys, so a lot of people have asked me, and I've heard this question come up. If you're a foreigner and you do get married in the Philippines, can you get divorced? And the answer is yes. I do want to read you a small clip before we bring on our guest, Ken, who is a practicing attorney in Tennessee, the United States. As a general rule, the Philippines does not adhere to divorce. However, by way of exception to this general rule, the Philippines does recognize a foreign decree of divorce granted by a foreign court to an alien spouse of a Filipino. For instance, Juan, a Filipino, is married to Jane, an American. If Jane files for divorce, and this is eventually granted by the American court, then such decree can be recognized here in the Philippines. Juan must first file for a recognition of foreign divorce before the appropriate court here in the Philippines before he can benefit from such foreign decree. The law granting the recognition of foreign divorce in the Philippines was made for the benefit of the Filipino spouse who was left by his or her foreign spouse. It allows the Filipino spouse to enter into another marriage after the divorce decree has been recognized. This is because it is absurd to prohibit the Filipino spouse from marrying another person when his ex-spouse is already forming another family with a new spouse. It is important to note that this law was originally intended for mixed marriages only, example, marriage between a Filipino and a foreigner, but now it is also applicable to marriages between Filipinos where one of the parties has become a naturalized citizen of another country. Thus, it is now safe to say that although the Philippines does not adhere to divorce, Filipinos who are left by their foreigner or naturalized spouse may now have their marriage dissolved here in the Philippines. That is through judicial recognition of foreign divorce. So let's go ahead and bring on Ken.
Well, the first thing I have to tell you is that because I am an attorney licensed to practice law, nothing I'm saying is to be construed to be legal advice. I'm licensed only in the state of Tennessee, and the viewers, if they, have, if they live in other states other than Tennessee here in the U.S., they need to consult with an attorney in their own jurisdiction.
Okay, perfect. So a lot of people, I don't think anybody goes into a marriage, of course, thinking, okay, we're going to get divorced, but a lot of people are under this impression that if you get married in the Philippines, because the Philippines has no divorce, you could only get an annulment. So we'll start there. You could get an annulment in the Philippines. Now, if you were to successfully get an annulment in the Philippines, will the United States recognize that annulment?
That's a very good question, Gio. That comes up in my practice as well when people come to ask me questions and seek help. The answer is yes. Each state, not the federal government, but each state is in control of divorce in their own states, and each state, all of the states, give full faith and credit to legal documents of other states and foreign countries.
Okay. So now that can be very time consuming and is never 100% guarantee. So can they come to we're not discussing other countries. I assume that other countries probably do something similar, but if they were to come to Tennessee or whatever state, can they file for divorce and get a divorce in the U.S.?
Okay, when you say they come, are you talking about the U.S. citizen or the Filipina?
The U.S. citizen. You marry a Filipina, you got married there. She never ever came over to the U.S., let's say, so she's still there. And you come back to the United States. Now, I know there's some ins and outs to it. So how would that go about?
Well, the answer is a bit tricky because The threshold requirement is that the court in that state have proper jurisdiction. And jurisdiction involves two aspects. It's subject matter jurisdiction, which means can the courts grant the divorce in that state? And the second one is do the courts have personal jurisdiction over the foreign penis? So for simplicity, let's kind of break it down into two scenarios.
Okay.
One is, let's say that the U.S. citizen goes over to the Philippines and meet somebody, and they may come back and go back over a time or two again and marry the Filipina. Then they keep coming, and then it comes home. And when the U.S. citizen comes home, let's say he's coming home to either wrap up his affairs and retire, or he's coming back to petition under immigration laws for her to come here to the United States. But something happens, something goes wrong, and they decide that they want to get a divorce. So the U.S. citizen is here. The Filipina is there in the Philippines, and so he goes to an attorney to ask about divorce. So in this particular case, if the U.S. citizen has his domicile, his residence in a particular state, that state has subject matter jurisdiction, can rule on the divorce. But residence is in the statute is not the same as residence in common law. What residence mean is your domicile. It's where you have lived and resided and intended to live for a period of 6 months. So, that's where he has his license. That's where he delivers his mail. That's where he owns property, has a lease. Domicile is where you intend to be living. You can have multiple residents like Florida and Tennessee, but you can only have one domicile. So 6 months in Florida, 6 months in Tennessee, you have to, it's the preponderance of the evidence of what you have done to show your intent to live somewhere. And you can only have one domicile. So in that respect, the court has subject matter jurisdiction in that state. And then the question of personal jurisdiction over the Filipina. Now, the quirky thing about personal jurisdiction is you can waive personal jurisdiction, but you can't waive subject matter jurisdiction. So let's say that the Filipina is properly served and does not do anything. Well, the law of personal jurisdiction says that can be waived, and it can be waived simply by if the divorce is filed and she is properly served. If she does nothing, what she should be doing is filing a motion or an answer denying jurisdiction, and that's it. And if she does not do that, then she has waived personal jurisdiction and the citizen can get the divorce. That's the easy part. The second scenario is the U.S. citizen becomes an expat and moves to the Philippines, and he's there on multiple tourist visas or a retirement visa, and is going through the process of being able to stay the 36 months, or has and has renewed it again. But even if it's been only renewing the tourist visa a couple times, if he is signed a lease or purchased a condo or bought land in the Philippines and built a house, and the house itself is in both names, what he has done is he's shown an intent to reside in the Philippines. And in that case, his home state would not have subject matter jurisdiction, even if he has, say, his mail goes to his sister's home, and he uses that for his address keeps his driver's license up and pays taxes there using his sister's home to pay taxes. And let's also say we can add to the mix that he owns a house that is either on the market or is being rented out, or both. and but yet he is showing to the court his intent to live in the Philippines. That's a sample example of having two residences, but his domicile would be the Philippines. So the expat,
Mhm.
if he is honest with his attorney and the attorney understands the law of jurisdiction, because a lot of them do not understand international jurisdiction. So in that case, if he either lies to his attorney or fails to mention to his attorney and just uses his sister's address or the property address, he'd be committing a fraud upon the court. And if the court awarded the divorce, he could be subject to criminal prosecution, or he could also have the divorce could be set aside, and then that opens up a rabbit hole of things that the wife, the Filipina, can do to try to get assets, and if he remarried, he'd be committing bigamy. So in that situation, the home state would not have jurisdiction because his domicile, where he intends to live, is in the Philippines. Now, you say, is there a way out of it? Yes, there is a solution. Basically, he'd have to come back to the United States and reestablish domicile, stay here for at least 6 months, do the things that show that you're domiciled here rather than there. So some of that would have to be, he wouldn't have to divest himself of any assets that he has in the Philippines, but he has to show an honest and provable intent to live here and be here for 6 months, and then he can get the divorce.
Okay. So two choices: either he gets the annulment in the Philippines and stays in the Philippines, or he has to go back and he's got to establish domicile again for minimum 6
Yes,
months.
that would be correct. Yes.
Okay.
Now, even with that, even if he
Mhm.
gets the domicile here, under either scenario, if the wife has never been here, and the only thing that you can get in the divorce is the divorce itself. If you've got children anywhere,
Mhm.
children with a Filipina, if you have assets, there's no dividing up of, there's no handling of the assets or child custody or child support. Now, this idea of child support, that also opens up a can of worms,
Right.
because Filipinas can get child support from American citizens
Ah, and I wonder how that
without ever
opens
coming
up.
to the United States.
Okay.
And being poor from the province, they can still get help collecting child support.
Wow. And probably a lot of Filipinos don't even realize that, maybe.
Yes, but we do live in the age of the internet,
Yes.
and most of them now have phones that that allow you access to the internet, and the word is getting around, because I've gotten some calls and I've handled some cases where poor women have used international resources to collect child support.
And there's a rumor that Filipinos love social media, so I'm sure maybe that they
Yes.
find
Well,
out.
the only evidence I have of that is my Filipino wife who loves the internet, and so, and there's resources and word gets around, so you can't really rely on that. And the one thing is, even if the expat lives on disability, disability is includable as income for purposes of child support, and not to mention alimony.
Wow. Hmm. Interesting. So, what about as far as your assets in the U.S.? If she's never been, this is the last question. If she's never come over, she's never established any residency in the United States, does she have a right to get any of your assets?
Well, what happens is, if she does not respond to the service process and does not file anything with the court, which, by the way, Filipinas can also contest a divorce or the division of property without ever coming to the United States. Now, with the technology that we have, she can appear by Zoom or WebEx. But the assets, the court would decide the division of assets, and so yes, his home could be at risk. The equity in his home. It's usually the equity from the time of the marriage, the equity increase from the time of the marriage to the date of the divorce. 401ks, military retirements, things like that can all be at risk if she contests the divorce. But if she doesn't, then pretty much the court will allow on a default basis, allow him to keep his assets that he has there.
Interesting. Good to know, because I think a lot of people are maybe a little bit under the impression that, oh, if I get married in the Philippines, she doesn't have access to any of that stuff.
Yeah. Now you're going to get some viewers that you may get some viewers that will say, well, what he's saying is not true. He says, my cousin Eddie has a friend whose whose son got himself a divorce. I'm in the South. I'm a Yankee in the South. So I sometimes play around with Southern expressions. He got himself a divorce, and he was, he was in the Philippines, and he didn't have to do anything. And there was none of this having to reestablish jurisdiction. He just used his sister's address, and that does happen. But the problem there is, if the court finds out on their own emotion, they can charge him with contempt. He can be criminally prosecuted for defrauding the court. Not to mention the fact I mentioned before that the court could set aside the divorce, which could have a lot of ramifications. So the best thing to do is to be open and honest and upfront with the attorney. And if the attorney says something different than what I just discussed, may want to get a second opinion from somebody who is a bit more experienced with international cases.
And I'll close it out by, again, even if you're granted the divorce in the U.S., you can't go back to the Philippines and automatically just get remarried. You still have to file for a recognition of foreign divorce before the appropriate court in the Philippines before they will.
Yes. And in addition to that, when you get your divorce decree, you can't just get there are three different types of certifications that are issued by the court. One is called true and correct. The second one is called certified. And then the third one is called certified by acts of Congress. And that is the one that you have to get in order to be valid in other countries.
Okay. And that one's a bit more difficult to get?
No, you just pay the fee and you just pay the clerk's fee, and it's easy to get. Some of the clerks don't even know about it, but because they have it happen so often if you're in smaller cities. But it's certification by acts of Congress that is what's needed for official recognition in foreign countries.
And again, most people probably wouldn't even know that, and they probably would just get the regular decree and go over and then be.
Yes, well, I have no idea what Philippines will do. They may accept a regular certified, but then again, they may not.
Right.
But when we do international parental abduction cases, we always have to get the certified by acts of Congress to ensure that they're recognized by foreign courts.
Okay. Well, this has been great information. And again, hopefully nobody ever needs it, because hopefully they get married and they live to their end of days happily together. So,
Yes.
but all right. Thank you so much. And questions, comments, comment down below, and maybe you'll take a peek at the comments once in a while. And, maybe a part 2 to this or something down the line.
I'd be honored to do that.
Thank you so much, Ken.
You're welcome.
Come on, groove it on. I said, baby, I know you're on a roll. Sweet honey, let's take it real slow.